always get nervous at the start because I always feel like I'm going to fuck up what I'm trying to say.
Just don't say excelente.
I love saying excelente though. Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it is where you are. Welcome to pilot episode 8 of the Evening Moon podcast. My name is Ben Coles and I'm joined as ever by the illustrious Steve Sweeney.
Good morning.
And joining us also for the first time is one of the Morning Star's newest journalists, Phil Miller.
Hello everyone.
And joining us again is Kadeem Simmonds.
I'm not actually here. I'm just here in spirit, so ignore me.
Well, we can ignore you. It's easy to ignore you when you're just listening.
Exactly. Well, hi.
So as ever, I think I forgot to say this just last week, but the Evening Moon podcast, we all work for the Morning Star, but it's not actually the Morning Star's official podcast or anything. Everything we say on here is our own opinions. So if you've got an issue, take it up with us. We're going to talk about 3 different stories today. We're going to talk about the German court ordering the government to ensure its territory is not used for US drone strikes. We're going to talk about the latest things happening in Turkey. But first, we're going to talk about a story that Phil wrote the other day on the transparency watchdog being understaffed. So why don't you introduce us about this story, Phil? Tell us what the situation is.
Yes, so people might be aware when you make a freedom of information request to a government department or the police, if you're unhappy with their response, you can appeal. And the first stage is you go to what's called the Information Commissioner's Office, which people might know because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So it also involves, it's responsible for like data protection breaches. So they went into Cambridge Analytica's offices and looked through their files for evidence of privacy breaches. Their other function, which they seem to be less good at, is handling complaints about freedom of information requests, particularly in their Belfast office. So they have, as far as I'm aware, they have a team in Wilmslow in Cheshire, which is their head office, and then they have smaller bureaus in Cardiff and Belfast. So if you made a freedom of information request about, say, the Welsh police, then if you were unhappy with the response, your complaint would be dealt with in the team in Cardiff. And I made a freedom of information request about the PSNI, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, for a file that they hold going back to the Troubles in 1973, when an MI5 counterinsurgency expert, John Morton, drew up a report on how to sort of fight a dirty war against the IRA and special branch tactics, and it's never been declassified, even though it's almost half a century old. So I've been trying to get this report from the PSNI because they hold an archive of all these sensitive files from the Troubles. They refused to give it to me, and then I complained to the Information Commissioner. The Information Commissioner took 9 months to even begin investigating the case. Bloody hell. And it's now been 17 months, and they still haven't reached a decision yet. So this made me suspicious about what was happening in the Belfast office. So then I made a freedom of information request to the Information Commissioner, so to the watchdog, and I asked, how many staff do you have in Belfast? And it turns out they only have 2 staff in the Belfast bureau, compared to about 47 in the Wilmslow office. And also the Cardiff office only has 2 staff. But the Belfast office has like 80% of the oldest cases, and that's cases that are over a year old. So they seem to be piling up. There's now dozens of cases over a year old in the Belfast office, one of which is mine. And some of the others as well probably relate to legacy issues from the Troubles. And the next thing I want to try and figure out is how many of these other complaints are about legacy issues. The Information Commissioner, we contacted them for comments, and they actually said that they acknowledge there's a problem in Belfast. They say they are allocating additional resources, whether that means
we could be anything.
one more member of staff. And yeah, so they say they're working on it, but it's something I'll definitely keep an eye on. And obviously it's frustrating because this case is still unresolved 17 months later. So yeah, that's
how long did it take them to get back to you about how many staff they had?
So they actually responded quite quickly. They're meant to respond within a month to freedom of information requests, and I think they did it within a couple of weeks. So in some ways they are quite transparent, but they're just also quite slow.
But I mean
strikes me as quite staggering. If you from what you were saying, the 47 staff that they have in Wilmslow, but just to have two staff in Belfast, and as you highlighted, a lot of those cases and a lot of the freedom of information requests and complaints and what have you are very likely a high percentage of those related to the Troubles and to legacy cases, and it kind of calls into question again. There's been the allegations of collusion between the British state and loyalist paramilitaries, and there's some of this is starting to come out a little bit into the open now, I guess, with with what happened over Bloody Sunday and Ballymurphy, and then the Miami Showband killings, and all of these kind of things are kind of bringing that into the spotlight. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's this saying that the way the British state hides its skeletons is by denying and then delaying and then waiting for you to die. And so they're definitely dragging their feet over this report, this very sensitive report about the Troubles. And I'm fortunate because I'm fairly young and I'm doing this as a journalist, so I can probably wait this out. But if I was a bereaved relative of someone who died at the start of the Troubles and was still waiting for justice, and I could well be in my 70s now, that delaying tactic does make it, in some cases, families may never find out what happened to their
Well,
loved
that's
ones.
what happened with Bloody Sunday, wasn't it? I think all of the parents of those who were killed are dead, but it's also used as an excuse by the British state not to prosecute people once that information does come out in the open. They're saying, well, as with Bloody Sunday, they were saying, well, what's the point in charging these people because they're old now, and it's...
Exactly. No, it does. It works in their favour, and they try and use it to work in their favour in many ways.
But it's important to remember that these aren't really just sort of gentle, sweet old men. They were cold-blooded killers.
Yeah,
and they quite rightly face prosecution, I think.
I mean, Jack Morton who wrote this report, had an extraordinary career all over the empire. He started in India as a colonial policeman, involved in crushing anti-independence movements there, and spying on Indian independence activists who had groups with Sinn Féin.
Wow.
This was in the 1930s, I think. So yeah, he went to what was then called Malaya, and was very involved in suppressing the Maoist uprising for independence there. So yeah, he had a sort of career steeped in oppression. He actually died in the 1980s, and his memoirs are at the British Library, but they stop at the point where he joins MI5.
Right.
So there's this huge gap in his career, which hopefully, if his report is ever declassified, it will shed more light on what he was up to in the Troubles.
Another issue is the fact that the Transparency Watchdog is understaffed is a big problem for democracy and for the freedom of the press and all sorts. Something that journalists do quite often is put in FOI, freedom of information requests, to find out what's happening. And if the government can delay, then it's just another a way of hampering journalism, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's quite a serious issue.
It can almost make the Freedom of Information Act meaningless, because a lot of stories we work on, they're only relevant within a certain window of time, and if you have to wait a year or 2 years to get a response, that story is no longer part of the news cycle. I mean, with these legacy issues, they are kind of rumbling on. So in this case, I think whenever we get disclosure, it will be interesting. But yeah, it can make a lot of freedom of information requests redundant.
You just say you spend your evenings. No, I'm not taking them out, because this sounds like really arduous and really. It's not the kind of thing you can do like on a 5-minute lunch break. You have to make this request and do all the research in the background and stuff like that. It obviously is what journalism is, but a lot of journalists kind of just want the here and now. They aren't interested in going back and looking at or even being vaguely interested in why these information isn't made public, and then when you do request it and they don't get back to you, it's like, oh, well, do you know what, I'll do something else. That sense for you to go, well, you know what, something doesn't seem right, it's quite remarkable, I guess.
I think once you get into the habit, it can be quite quick. So you can see a story in the news and think there's probably more behind that, and you can stick in an FOI quite quickly once you get used to writing them. And then it will take like a month to get a response, so you just crack on with everything else you're doing, and then the response comes through, and if it's interesting, then you can get a story out of it. The appeals process does get more time consuming as you go on. If you're not happy with what the Information Commissioner decides, then you can appeal to an information tribunal, which is effectively a court. There's no cost for that appeal, but you do have to sort of make submissions, and that can be more laborious.
But that's what I mean, though. It's kind of like, you start digging into something, and they can very quickly go, we actually don't want you to. They can, deny your request, and a lot of people will just go, oh, okay, it's clearly not that important. Whereas you're like, well, no, just they're clearly hiding something, and to keep on going when other people will just, give up. It's amazing to me who does sport anyway. It's a different side of the coin, I guess.
I think you have to be tactical as well. So if they're like building a wall in front of you, you don't always have to try and smash straight through it. You can look for ways to go around it or over it. And often with a story, there are different ways of getting to the information. So with the case of this Morton report, I'd asked MI5 for a copy, but they're not giving it to me. So it's one of the cases where there's only really this route, is to get it from the police in Belfast. But if it was a more recent event, I could try and speak to people in the police who might have been involved in drawing it up, or do you know what I mean? Other ways of trying to build up the story. I think you can always think it's not always worth pursuing FOI requests all the way. Sometimes if you get refused, then you might just find another way of building the story.
The interesting thing is as well, you don't need to be a journalist, do you, to do these FOI requests? Like, anyone can do them.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point of them. I don't know if off the top of your head you can tell people listening to this where they can find out more information on how to do these things.
Yeah, so there's the Campaign for Freedom of Information, who were involved in lobbying for this act to be passed back in 2000. So their website has lots of resources. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who else has resources. Like Centre for Investigative Journalism, they probably have some resources on their website. There are quite a few guides that you can find. Even the Information Commissioner's website as well has some materials on the different reasons they can refuse requests, which can be quite helpful if your request is refused and you're trying to appeal it.
Interesting stuff.
Thanks.
Shall we move on to the next story? Why don't we talk about yours next, Steve? What's going on in Turkey?
Well, interesting developments in Turkey. We're coming up now to the local elections. They're taking place on March the 31st and across Turkey. And the People's Democratic Party, HDP, the pro-Kurdish opposition party, are hoping to retake some of the municipalities that were taken over by Erdogan, who essentially arrested more than 80 mayors and replaced them with administrators, pro-government administrators in these.
What's Erdogan's party called? The Justice Party, right?
Jajustice and Development Party, the AKP. So he just appointed these administrators, pro-government administrators, and jailed the mayors. This is part of his sort of crackdown on all opposition inside the country, whether it's journalists, public sector workers, teachers, academics, and ordinary people who are feeling the full force of Erdogan's tyranny. So, interestingly, I mean, as you probably know, readers of the paper will know that there's been a campaign led by Leyla Güven, who's an HDP MP, and she on November the 8th started a hunger strike. And her hunger strike is in protest at the continued isolation of Kurdistan Workers' Party leader Abdullah Öcalan, who's been held in isolation on Imrali Island. Now, they're estimated about 5,000 are involved in this campaign, the hunger strike campaign now. It's gathered a lot of momentum. We have Imam Shish, who's been on hunger strike for over 70 days in Wales. There's a motion in front of the Welsh Parliament today. They're discussing his case and whether it's going to get backing and support for the Kurdish hunger strikers campaign.
Today being March the 20th, which I didn't mention at the beginning, I don't think.
On Sunday, one of the first hunger striker died in Turkey, Zulkuf Gezen. He took his own life in the prison. He hung himself with a washing line, and the response of the Turkish state was pretty horrendous even by their standards. They were accused of abducting the body. So the body was supposed to fly out in the morning from Istanbul's Ataturk airport to Diyarbakir, where there was going to be a burial, but instead they took the body in the middle of the night without the consent or knowledge of his family, who just received a phone call saying, "We're burying the body in the night, you can come or don't come." I mean, hugely disrespectful. And it just shows that, you know, even if you're dead, that's the treatment that you expect from the Turkish state. So he's the first person to have died, the first hunger striker to have died. When they blocked HDP officials from attending the funeral, they blocked a delegation had gone with the family. He was buried in front of a couple of family members, but police then turned water cannons on those who had come up to mourn his death. So they attacked them and sprayed them with water cannons. So tensions are running pretty high. Today's Newroz, so it's the Kurdish New Year today, and there'll be huge celebrations in the south, across the southeast of Turkey. Typically, these are attacked by Turkish security services. I mean, there'll be thousands and thousands of people, especially in places like Diyarbakir, in Van, and other kind of major cities across the southeast. This morning or yesterday, a delegation of French communists from the French Communist Party were arrested at the airport as they flew in. They were heading to Diyarbakir for one. They were heading for Newroz, and two, they were heading as election observers. So this, when I was over there last year for the presidential and parliamentary elections, I think 17 international observers were arrested, including from France, from Germany, from Italy, and they were accused of interfering. I mean, this is incredible. Accused of interfering with the democratic process of an election in the country.
Election observers interfering,
which was astonishing given what the Turkish state had done. So, but this is big news, really, that these Turkish members of the French Communist Party have been arrested. They were apparently held in a detention centre at the airport, and they're going to be flown home this morning. So we'll probably hear more about what they've got to say about that later. I mean, I've been with the PCF, the French Communist Party, on many delegations and many. I've carried out election observation with them. So they've been big supporters of the opposition movement in Turkey. But here they are as election observers, facing arrest. So this gives a taste of probably what's to come in next week's election. Erdogan has already said he'll refuse to recognise HDP election victories. He's branded them terrorists, and I think things are going to get will probably be pretty grim.
What's the other? There's another opposition party. What do they call it? Is it the CHP?
Well, they're the Kemalist party. I guess you could say nominally. I mean, you can't compare them really, actually, to a party here. Labour has fraternal relations with them, but also with the HDP. But this is, they're the big supporters of Ataturk. I don't know even if you can call them Social Democratic Party. It's really difficult to sort of locate them on the political scale. But as an opposition party, they're fairly ineffective. In last year's presidential election, there was the great hope behind their candidate Muharrem İnce, who seemed to be taking the country by storm. He was speaking in front of hundreds of thousands of people. They say 1 million people turned out for one of his election rallies. But as an opposition party, they don't offer much in the way of opposition. So they supported Turkey's invasion of Afrin in northern Syria. They voted in favour of the lifting of immunity from prosecution for MPs, which led to the arrest of all of the HDP MPs and the thousands of activists and mayors and this kind of thing. So they voted in favour of that, and they don't really stand up to Erdogan in any kind of effective manner whatsoever. So you call them an opposition party, but I mean, I would argue that they've been entirely ineffective in that role. The only real opposition comes from the HDP.
Because Erdogan's government and Erdogan himself, they tolerate the CHP, I guess, but not the HDP.
they tolerate them because they support, when they're backing the government in what the government does. I mean, they have launched investigations into CHP MPs. There was a group of them that were faced charges because they shared a cartoon lampooning Erdogan. So they were investigated for the crime of insulting the president.
That's not quite.
Yeah, with a maximum 4 years prison.
We'd be fucked.
And
Again, not to interrupt you, but it's one of those things where, in certain countries that's a crime, and as you just alluded to, like over here in England, like the amount of abuse, rightfully so, that Theresa May normally gets, but I just find it so, again, interesting that in certain countries you dare speak out against, the person in charge, be it king, president, or whatever, and the reaction is not freedom of speech; it's get in jail.
They have like hotlines now where you can phone the authorities to say to basically grass people up. And there's been all sorts of cases like a nephew who was grassed up by his uncle for insulting Erdogan inside the family home. There was a whole class of students that were grassed on by their lecturer for insulting the most famous case is the Gollum case, which some of you might know, but for those that don't, there was a court case where an individual had shared a meme on social media which compared Erdogan to Gollum, and said that they looked
From the Lord of the Rings.
From Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings character.
My precious.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't watch this kind of thing. I'm aware of what this character looks like, and it went all the way through to the court. And the defence team said, "Well, ask the judges, have you actually seen Lord of the Rings?" And they said no. So, in order to judge this case and come to that, the defence were arguing, well, Gollum's a good character. And so this isn't a bad thing. It can't be insulting to be compared to a good character. So the judges had to retire from the case and watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy.
That's like 10 hours.
Yeah,
Well done.
Did they watch the director's cuts?
I don't know idea. I mean, that's the absurdity of what's happening in Turkey.
But the crazy thing is that Turkey's a NATO ally. It's friendly. The West is friendly to it. They've got the most journalists. I think it's still.
Yeah.
Still got the most journalists.
A third of the world's total jail journalists. 170,000 public sector workers sacked. Around 8,000 or 9,000 academics blacklisted and sacked for signing a petition calling for peace. Opposition MPs incarcerated, facing lengthy prison sentences. Journalists that aren't in prison are self-censoring. I mean, it's pretty, trade unionists arrested and charged with terrorism for taking strike action. I mean, that's the state. What's happening in Turkey, and of course, Erdogan has these increased powers after last year's election, which followed on from the rigged constitutional referendum, where 2.5 million unstamped ballots were counted in the vote, which tipped it in his favour. So, things are. I mean, there's always hope. And there is hope, and hope lies with, those HDP, activists that are campaigning to take back the municipalities, and it lies in those brave journalists who are still speaking out against Erdogan. But always the case is always the same for us here. Is the reason that Erdogan is able to persecute people in Turkey is because he has the support of the British government. Who of course have supported every authoritarian regime in history, but also Erdogan knows that where he sits geographically is crucial, because he sits. Turkey borders Syria, it borders Iran, and it borders Iraq. All three countries which have surprise, masses of oil. All three countries which Britain and the US and imperialism wants regime changing. And it also sits, across the Black Sea from Russia as well. So it acts as a bulwark against the new bogeyman, which is Putin and Putin's Russia. So,
And just before we move on to the next story, what's happening with these? How many people were arrested from the French Commie Party?
French Communist Party.
Yeah.
I think there was two that were part of a delegation. So there was two that were arrested, and they're due to be deported from Turkey and flown back this morning. So we'll hear more on that later, really. But this is. I mean, this kind of thing happens more often than people probably realise. Julie Ward, who's an MEP from the Labour Party in the northwest, she was also arrested on the way to, I think, Diyarbakir, or she was arrested at Diyarbakir Airport, and she's an elected European parliamentarian, and she was held and detained for hours, and they took her phone, her tablet, her laptop, and they went through all of her her private emails and all that kind of thing as well. And she's an elected parliamentarian, so they don't care who they target. Is the point. They'll target elected politicians. It's of no concern to them whatsoever.
I find that really interesting, though. Interesting that someone from Britain kind of not get caught up in this, but would get detained and stuff like that. In the sense that I naturally assume that countries like Turkey and stuff like that wouldn't want to piss off England, because I don't know. It's
there is something in that, because look, they've held. Turkey don't care about the journalists that they hold. They've held Dennis Yücel, who's a German, Turkish-born German journalist, who they held in prison for a year without charge. They've held French journalists. They've held Italian journalists. In fact, they goaded me about this when they detained me. And I do think there was something in that. Every time I've been held there and every time I've been quizzed there, having a British passport is important in a way, because they won't want to go to war over a small left-wing newspaper, journalists from a small left-wing newspaper, with the only country that they have reasonable relations with in Europe. Britain's the only place, where Theresa May, the Prime Minister, invited Erdogan on a state visit during that election period. No other country would allow him. Most European countries have even banned their ministers from holding election rallies there. Britain rolled out the red carpet and had him on a state visit, where he met the Queen, and during that visit was a press conference. I was banned from going, unofficially banned. I mean, I was 3 times a day. I was calling them 3 times a day every day to find out when the press conference was, and to be added to the list of accredited journalists. And I work for a national daily newspaper. I'm the international editor. I have a right to be there, and especially when Turkey is one of my specialist subject areas that I write about quite a lot. And they refused to allow me entries to that. But at that press conference, it was the press conference where Theresa May praised Erdogan for his fight against Kurdish terrorism. Yeah, I mean, it was an astonishing statement.
And that's why I find it interesting, because it's like Turkey detaining, British journalists. It's like, well, hold on, that, if anything, that's only going to highlight what they're doing, because I don't know, I just find that really interesting.
But I think really it is because they wouldn't want to upset relations with with the British government.
But then, obviously, because I do sport, what's interesting is that Mesut Ozil is getting married soon, and apparently he's invited Erdogan to the wedding, like personally.
Really?
Apparently so, yeah.
This is the Mesut Ozil who apologised after being photographed with Erdogan. Yeah. This was during that state visit during that election period.
I've read it on football.london a couple of days ago. That nothing's official yet, but the story is that he's invited Erdogan to his wedding, and yet you get a whole, like you said, the situation between Germany and Turkey and stuff like that. So it's very, politically.
Let's move on to the next story, shall we? And only in the interest of time, not because I'm bored of listening to you talk.
No, it's fine. Again, I actually shouldn't be talking. I'm the silent observer in the corner.
No, I quite like this dynamic with you in here, actually. So the next story we're going to talk about is a German court in Germany. Surprise, surprise.
Look at that segue.
Good segue, wasn't it? A court in Germany has ordered the government to ensure that its territory is not being used by the US for drone strikes in Yemen. This happened yesterday. So that would have been March the 19th. The court ruled that the government has a duty to protect those targeted in drone strikes. And it also ruled that the that the German government has to encourage the US to respect international law. Now, what I don't know entirely what is the legal situation of these drone strikes? Does anyone know? I mean, I imagine they must be illegal. I can't imagine the world just sitting by if, for example, Russia drone bombed somebody. That it would cause an uproar. Surely these are illegal, right?
Well, I'm guessing that's what's being contested. I think, isn't it, with the use of drones to carry out? They've called them extrajudicial executions when people have been singled out and targeted by drone attacks. But also, they're not more often than not, they don't actually hit the intended target, and they end up drone attacks end up blowing up weddings and funerals and schools.
I think what they end up doing is after they've fired and blown up a wedding or whatever, then they classify them as targets. It's a terrible state of affairs. But what's interesting is this ruling yesterday was the first time a European country was found to be playing a role in the US's legally dubious strikes, and it came about because of a Yemeni man with two other people brought the case to the German legal system, I guess. One of the guys' names was Faisal bin Ali Jabber. I'm sure I've definitely said his name wrong.
You have.
But he lost two members of his family in Yemen from a US drone strike, and he took this to the court in 2016, I believe. I think it was 2016, and he had the help of two human rights charities, two human rights organisations, Reprieve and the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights. And I believe you said yesterday, Phil, that you actually gave me the story yesterday, which I was really pleased about. I was covering Steve, who was pulling a sickie.
On his day off.
On his day off, which is quite interesting. Did you used to work for Reprieve then, Phil?
Yeah, I did for a while. And so this is a very long-running case that Reprieve have been working on with Faisal, the Yemeni engineer, it was his brother-in-law Salim, who was an imam who preached against Al-Qaeda just days before he was killed in the drone strike, and also his nephew Walid, who was a policeman. So he's quite upstanding members of the community in Yemen who were killed in US drone strike. Exactly the kind of people that would make the situation worse, right? In the sense that these were civilians who were kind of calling out extremism, and then they're the ones who are killed, and that's kind of like, if anything, that will
radicalise other people, right?
Precisely, yeah. So Faisal has been bringing, with the help of Reprieve and others, bringing litigation in. I think they tried in the US as well. So they've been looking at the US drone program and all the links in it, and then trying to bring litigation wherever a country is involved. And obviously with Germany, because it's at the heart of the EU, and under human rights law, which we've adopted in our domestic legislation here, but in EU human rights law as well, you have this idea of the right to life, which has to be protected. And this has been applied as well, I think, when British troops were fighting in Iraq. Iraqi detainees were found to have, rights to life, certain protections on how long they could be held in custody, and so on. So this is another really interesting application of that law, as far as I understand. I might have got that point wrong, but it's to the best of my knowledge. So saying that they have to, protect life, and they can't just allow a satellite link on German soil to be involved in the indiscriminate killing of civilians in Yemen. So it does seem like a really landmark judgment, and Reprieve is saying that the UK should now be on notice.
Yes.
Of course, the UK are very involved in this drone program as well. I think there are RAF drone pilots based in the US who help fly drones there in Nevada, and also there's some bases in the UK as well that are like Menwith Hill, perhaps, that are involved. There's Jen Gibson at Reprieve, who is an expert on this subject, and she could tell us exactly which bases around the world are involved in this.
We're going to have to interview her, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that Reprieve. I'm really happy that they said that the UK is on notice, because obviously Britain has a huge role in this and allowing it to happen. It reminds me of I'm not sure if you wrote this story, but it might have been just before you started here. The British Army was had all these recruiting posters, and they were like, "We're looking for snowflakes," and blah blah blah. And one of the types of people they asked for was video gamers. And the link in my head as a video gaming geek was like, do they want gamers to fly drones?
I think they do increasingly. I think this is how, after wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where so many veterans came back with not just in coffins, but with limbs missing, life-changing, lifelong injuries. The government have looked for ways to make warfare less so it's less messy for the British people involved, and drones is obviously a way of, it means that British soldiers or pilots won't be killed, but of course the consequences for the civilians at the receiving end of it can be absolutely horrific. These drones use missiles to call things like Hellfire, things like this. So I mean that's the kind of devastation that's being inflicted on these parts of the world with almost no oversight whatsoever. I think in Iraq and Syria the UK did something like 4,000 kills, and they say only one was a civilian, which would be like a record. So I mean, there's a complete fiction there about how clinical this form of warfare is. And
well, that's one of the things they often say is precise bombing. I mean, you can precisely bomb a building, but you don't know who's in it.
Exactly.
I think it's, and again, I wouldn't say I'm a gamer per se, but I do play video games. If you ever played Call of Duty, especially after Modern Warfare, to the second Modern Warfare, when they introduced AC-130, and obviously it's just a video game.
What's AC-130?
I don't know what it actually stands for, but it was a kill streak, which you're in a. So obviously, if you ever played Call of Duty, it's a first-person shooting game where you're on the ground per se shooting people. If you manage to get, but then they introduced a kill streak system. So if you got 5 kills, you got they call it a drone strike, and that again you can. And it's so interesting because like I said, I've never thought about it this way, but you then go from first person shooting mode to directing this missile basically, and talking about I might see one person on the screen which I'm aiming for, but as that missile hits that person, I might get 2 or 3 more kills because someone's standing nearby, which kind of proves that you might try and kill this one terrorist, and I use that in inverted commas, but it's not like once it hits that person, that's only like the damage could go from miles depending on what kind of thing you
Exactly.
do. And you need something like an AC-130 which can just drop missiles and bombs like they're going out of fashion. And again, I can now see why they would want these video gamers because.
Well, it's interesting because I wanted to look, and there must like the link between that game and the military. I wonder if there's any sort of link. But what is certainly true is if you ever go to like these gaming conventions, and 2 years ago I went to one which I can't blank on the name of, EGX in Birmingham. The British Army's there. They've got a stall there, and they're trying to recruit people. But I don't know if. It's a very strange thing. I can't imagine most gamers would be up for joining the military, but they might think that piloting a drone would be something they could do.
That's the thing, though. And again, you kind of see in TV shows and movies that you're getting these computer hackers, computer geeks who are kind of always portrayed as these overweight people who sit in rooms and can cause absolute devastation. But it's very much a video game conference is actually a really smart recruiting tactic because these guys basically spend their days, weeks, months just killing people in a video game, and it's like, how about do you want to get paid money to do that and actually kill humans or kill terrorists and stuff like that? All you've got to do is sit in a room and just click, and that's it.
But part of this is to sanitize war.
Yeah.
The whole point of the drone thing is to say, look, this is about risk-free, and risk-free war. So it's selling war to the public.
Yeah.
By saying, look, we don't need to send troops and soldiers in now. It's risk-free. Only civilians are killed by. No civilians are killed by drone attacks. They're targeted killings. and it just softens it up and says, look, things are much better now. We have this technology that can make a risk-free case for war. But in fact, the opposite is the case, because drones are being used in built-up residential areas, and the actual civilian casualties are incredibly high. The thing is that as we've been talking about earlier, this is covered up, and the statistics. When you try and get that information, it's classified information. They won't give you the details of. They even deny that civilians are killed.
Yeah, well, they don't keep the data.
And
As well.
yeah,
I think that's one way they get around it.
Or they would argue that that they were civilian, but they were harbouring fugitives, so they kind of deserve to die. It's like they were family members with a known terrorist, and it's just they just haven't been in the wrong place for a long time.
Sometimes they don't even bother with that. They just don't say anything. They just say they don't have that information.
The thing about numbers is, like you said, they don't keep the records, but the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has been, investigating drone strikes, and they found since 2002, when drone bomb strikes started happening in Yemen, that 897 people have been killed, and I think that they estimated that was the minimum number of people killed that they estimated, and the minimum number of civilians they estimated have died since 2002 is 91. That's the minimum. And that's pretty depressing. And the boss had just given me the old tap on the wrist there. So I think we should wrap up. Normally we would do a stupid question, but I think it's been a bit too serious for a stupid question this episode. Let's wrap up. So Kadeem, if people want to find you on social media, where can they do that?
Twitter at Kadeem Simmonds. Kadeem is Kadeem, and Simmonds SIMMONDS.
And how about you, Phil? Where can people find you if they wish to do so?
Probably at PMillerInfo on Twitter.
PMillerInfo. How about you, Steve?
At Sweeney Steve, that's SWEENEYSTEVE on Twitter.
Cool. And if you want to find me, I'm at Colsey, which is COWLESZ. Should we wrap up?
Yeah.
I did think the other day of a word of something to say right at the end to end the podcast. Normally I just go, let's end, and it stops.
Live long and prosper.
Peace.